Welcome into this Friday edition of Frankly Hockey on Victory Plus, an evening edition as day 3 of the men's Olympic hockey tournament has wrapped up. Well, women's side as well, also wrapping up. But Brian Ray with you, filling in for John Buccigross alongside NHL insider Frank Saravalli. Frank, you're 2 days into your Olympic experience. How are things over there in Milan as another great slate of games over and done with after the day?
Yeah, getting used to the lay of the land here, navigating transport, taking subways, light rail, buses, whatever it takes to get out to Santa Giulia Arena, which sounds beautiful, but is kind of far away from where almost everyone is staying.
Well, if you're a fan of Canadian men's hockey or U.S. women's hockey, it's been a beautiful sight out there because of what those teams have been doing on the ice. Let's show you what occurred today in terms of the men's side, and obviously a big win for Canada, big win for Finland and Sweden. That was the early game here in the U.S. But all in all, it's weird because it's basically we're 2 games in, but we can already see some things taking shape and some early trends developing here with the men's bracket from the games we saw today.
Yeah, I'm really glad, Brian, that we were pretty chalky in our predictions, because what's really clear to me through 3 games of watching the U.S. and Canada is that they appear to be on a much different level than everyone else in this tournament. And it's going to be really difficult to knock one of those teams out. I mean, never say never. It's a single game elimination. Anything could happen. And Switzerland actually looked pretty good. They look like a medal contender to me with how fast they played. Sidney Crosby spoke about that after Canada's win. But look, these 2 teams have shown that they're in a separate class, and that is, man, that would give us exactly what we're looking for.
Yeah, I do wonder, did Finland finally find their legs after being upset by Slovakia? Sweden, should we expect more? Do they find their legs after that game against Finland? I think those are the 2 teams you look at as maybe that next tier below Canada and the U.S., but switching things over to the results and the groups and where everybody actually stands, Canada's already punched their ticket to the quarterfinal, which I think we all expected to happen. But Group B, we're going to dive into the minutia of that group and some of the storylines developing. There's still some things to be played out with Group B, and then as long as the U.S. takes care of their business, they should be right behind Canada heading into the quarterfinal.
Yeah, and look, it's the chaos of Group B that has everyone's attention, at least certainly mine, heading into the weekend. The U.S. had Friday off. They did not practice, but their game against Denmark is actually going to be somewhat important, and I'll explain why when we get to talking about the U.S. But for now, Canada, first team to clinch their group. They do it in very convincing fashion against 2 of the tougher teams to face in the first handful of days here in Milan. In a lot of respects, it feels like the tournament hasn't even started yet, which brings us to Connor McDavid and how incredible his run has been. That if you think that, I mean, the tournament barely started or didn't even start by some respects, that McDavid is somehow already closing in on the Olympic record books.
At least for Canada, and in terms of a full Olympic with NHL participation in those point records, that is well within his sights. A 5-1 win for Canada over Switzerland. I think we all expected Canada to beat Switzerland, but obviously Connor McDavid is having his early impact on what's going on here. And for Canada as a team, watching that game against Switzerland, it's almost a question of how long can you play at Canada's pace, because it's wave after wave after wave. And as tough as the Swiss tried to play against them, you could just see the back break in that third period. And obviously McDavid, with another 3 points for him today, has his fingerprints all over what Canada is doing to teams in their first 2 games right now. But it's just who is going to be able to either play at that pace for an entire hockey game or figure out a way to slow down that thoroughbred horse that is Team Canada right now. That's the $64,000 question, it appears, for whoever's going to deal with this team moving forward.
And good luck, because it kind of felt like watching the long distance speed skating today, which I saw earlier. And I don't know if you saw the men's 10,000 meter, but it was absolutely electric. A 19-year-old Czech ended up winning the gold medal. And that's just a slog, right? 10,000 meters. Like, it is 13 minutes of consecutive speed skating. And that's kind of what it's like going up against Canada. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the most impressive part of this opening 2 games for Canada. Not that they took care of business and outscored their opponents by a 10-1 margin, but it's every wave that came over the boards. There was urgency, there was
Yeah.
desperation, there was physicality. There wasn't a shift that was taken off. And I'm not saying that to like pat Canada on the back. I'm saying that's a reality that every other team in this tournament is going to have to face, is those guys staring you down, ultra hungry and motivated. I'm not sure that I expected to see that in the second half of a game in the Olympics on a back-to-back when Canada was mostly already in the driver's seat. They didn't stop. They didn't slow down at all. There was zero governor on that engine.
Looking at that first goal of that game coming on the power play, and this might be the biggest problem for the United States if they end up facing Canada at some point in the playoff round or in the medal round. But you're rolling out McDavid, MacKinnon, Crosby, Makar. I didn't even get whoever the fifth person was on that first power play unit. I just stopped at those 4 because those 4 alone could run a power play against a penalty kill. But how do you not take a penalty against this team right now when they have the players they have and arguably dominate puck possession better than anything we might see in recent history? I don't know, long-term history. It's almost like what Colorado and the NHL does to teams. They have the puck so much, but it just feels like, how do you not take a penalty against a team like that always has the puck? And then when you do that, you're dealing with that for your number 1 power play unit. That, to me, right now, in the first 2 days or the first 3 days, that's the number 1 question if the U.S. goes up against Canada that they have to find a way to manage and deal with.
So the power play is one thing, and that's a great reminder, actually, because I was pretty surprised that when Canada scored the goal to go ahead 3-1 in the arena, it wasn't just me. The 4 guys sitting to my right, we all said, as the entry happened, we were like, that's offside. Like we said, and then we were like, oh, watch Celebrini score here, and then it'll get called back. And yet Switzerland never challenged, because the only thing worse than being down 3-1 is giving that power play another crack if you're wrong and being down 4-1. So
Yeah.
I understand why you might not want to challenge in that circumstance, although I would think the allure of watching what Latvia did and keeping it to 2-1 might be pretty appealing. But nonetheless, it's trying to slow down the power play, but also trying to slow down McDavid. I mean, take a look at the Olympic record books and where McDavid sort of fits already through 2 games. He's got 6 points in his first 2 games. The all-time Canadian record in any single Olympics when you have NHL participation is Jonathan Toews back in 2010 when they won in Vancouver. But no Canadian has ever led the Olympics in scoring, interestingly enough, in the best on best NHL era, which is fascinating because the teams have been so balanced. Here are the Olympic record holders, Timo Solanne and Saku Koivu, teammates on Finland in 2006. They had 11 each. McDavid has 6 points through 2 games, and he could play another 4 in this tournament. He might get to 10 by the end of this weekend, by the time we have another Frankly Hockey on Monday. So it's right in front of McDavid. And what stands out is this is a guy who's getting his first crack at making a statement, having one of those statement type tournaments for one of the most decorated players ever. But he pointed out in the Players Tribune, Brian, that he hasn't won anything in more than 10 years playing on a team.
Yeah.
That's a really long time. It's almost like he's got this right in front of him, this grasp on this greatness, and he's like a dog on a bone. There's no chance that he's going to let this go because he has been that ridiculously good through these first 2 games.
Well, the Canadian points record, I think, is going to be at least tied, if not done, by the second period of Canada's next game with what McDavid has been doing and just how ferocious he looks. And yeah, Exactly. I mean, I don't want to say the first period. It might even be the first period. I want to give myself a little leeway, so I'm going to say the second period when he's going to set that Canadian record. But it does feel like by the time the quarterfinal round is done, he could be at or will be at double digits in terms of points in this tournament, and it's astonishing for a player like him. Nathan MacKinnon said the same thing, but before Colorado had won their Stanley Cup, he'd been there for 9 years and he hadn't won, what. For players like that are used to winning. Like if you think about Connor McDavid, he's essentially been the best player, whether it's his team, whether it's his age group, whether it's junior hockey. I mean, he has been the best and winning from day one of his hockey life. And then, you hit this you get to this point and you're like, man, what is it going to take for me to finally have that grand achievement? And he does look like a man on a mission. Obvious MVP of the tournament pick, which was yours, but there's good reason behind it. And now he gets Nathan MacKinnon on his line for this one today. Apparently not enough weapons for Connor McDavid. Let's give him Nathan MacKinnon. Are you serious?
And I thought a brilliant change from John Cooper. We need to come up with nicknames for this, by the way, because this line, I mean, it's video game stuff. Connor McDavid, Macklin Celebrini, and Nathan MacKinnon. I'm calling them the Big Mac line. I like it. I think it should stick, but what do you got?
I got nothing, but off the top of my head, I do love to joke that McDavid is McJesus. I mean, I don't McDominance, McGoals, McWins. I feel like you gotta tweak something there.
That might be something. McGolden.
Yeah, McGold. If they win the gold, they are absolutely the McGolden line. That's. I think that's there's possibilities there. I think we need to let it play out for maybe 1 or 2 more games before something truly sticks. But for Nathan MacKinnon, not that he had a quiet first game, but I think we were wondering, all right, McDavid came out in that first game, threw the massive check, and his presence was known. When were we going to have maybe a Nathan MacKinnon moment or a Nathan MacKinnon period? And it feels like now playing with McDavid, that's going to unlock him at this level to now start turning things up even further than what he normally does.
And that's why the change was so incredibly necessary, because Nathan MacKinnon on that line with Nick Suzuki and Brandon Hagel, it just wasn't working. Like, I don't know if those guys aren't big enough. I don't know what the story is, but Nick Suzuki looked lost out there at times, particularly on the wall in his own end. And now when they put him back at center, that seemed to click. So a couple interesting sort of ripple effects that come from making this change, putting MacKinnon on the right wing of Connor McDavid, is the Canadian three-headed monster that was McDavid, Crosby, MacKinnon down the middle obviously is no more. So there's a bit more of a dichotomy here of top 6 and bottom 6. I mean, a pretty clear delineation, and that Crosby, Marner, Stone line has pretty much been electric from the start. It was interesting to me to see Sam Bennett get a little bit more time. It felt like he was definitely more active than Bo Horvat. And so that's going to be one thing to watch moving forward. But Tom Wilson going from that spot where he was playing with Macklin Celebrini and Connor McDavid, I don't know how prominent of a role you're going to see Tom Wilson play now, not just in minutes, but also in terms of impact. So maybe it's just a game against the U.S. where you really notice someone like a Tom Wilson. But I thought this move to try and get MacKinnon some better looks, I mean, that paid off with almost instant dividends there late in the period.
Just to touch on your Tom Wilson comment there, regardless of him being dropped in the lineup a little bit, there's a Tom Wilson club you still have in your bag. So whatever direction this tournament goes for Canada, he's still going to be a valuable asset, obviously, even if he's not playing on that top line with McDavid. You mentioned MacKinnon and playing with, Suzuki and Hagel, and I have it's purely a theory about this, but being based in Dallas and having watched the Colorado Avalanche roll through here, and it's not just MacKinnon, it's certain players overall. McDavid's one of these, but somebody like Nathan MacKinnon, I've always felt they play the game at a different speed than normal NHL players. It's what makes him and McDavid and Celebrini's turning into one of these players, but it's what makes them the elite of the elite. And it can be really difficult to find other players that can play at that speed. And it's not necessarily that you need to have the foot speed, but somebody like Sidney Crosby could play with them because he can think the game at that same speed.
Yeah.
Mikko Rantanen, when he was in Colorado and they could load up, Rantanen and McKinnon and McCarr, those three players could either think the game or skate the game at the same speed as Nathan MacKinnon. Even in the Olympics, it can be really difficult, I always feel, to find players that can play the game at that speed. Connor McDavid, and as we're learning now, Macklin Celebrini, they can play the game and or think the game at the same speed as Nathan MacKinnon, which is why I think that clicks so instantly the second John Cooper lines them up.
Yes, and great point. And what I would say is now the interesting wrinkle is going to be, when was the last time Nathan MacKinnon even played the wing? He talked about that after the game of like, hey, I need to change my angles. I need to change how things work in the offensive zone because I'm going to be arriving later and the routes. It is going to be interesting to watch him adjust. And what does it say about Macklin Celebrini that he's able to play and think at that level at his age? Yeah. And then I had another point to make about McDavid that I had forgotten, which was this kind of reminds me this point production of when he was with the Oilers in the playoffs a couple years ago and won the Conn Smythe. And you're thinking, okay, he was able to put up a ridiculous number of points and set a new NHL record in assists in one playoff. And that was really impressive. But now to do it in the Olympics, it's not like just the Stanley Cup playoffs. It's the Olympics. Yeah. That's a whole different level. 6 points in 2 games is insane behavior, and we're all here for it.
Connor McDavid is going video game right now on the first 2 games of the Olympics for Canada. Nathan MacKinnon playing with him now. That is going to be a ferocious top line that was already a train to deal with on the opposing side, and Canada has already punched their ticket to the quarterfinal round. The other story coming out of this game actually involves the players who did not play, and we saw Josh Morrissey leave game 1 with the injury. He did not play in this one, and John Cooper said not out for the tournament, but he may not be playing in the next game for Canada. Jordan Binnington, you thought he might get the night off entirely. That's exactly what happened. But Brad Marchand also scratched from this game. So, some questions regarding Morrissey's health. We'll see what happens with Marchand. But, some movement in this Canada lineup from game 1 to game 2, obviously.
I like it for a number of reasons. Definitely concerning with the Josh Morrissey injury, but you're right. John Cooper said Morrissey will not play on Sunday, but definitely not done for the tournament, which is an important distinction to make. Brad Marchand sits out as the, I'm going to call it air quotes, healthy scratch. Not shocking because he was banged up heading into the tournament and it's a back-to-back scenario. So you want to make sure that he's good for when it counts. But I really like the idea of working back in Seth Jarvis and Travis Sanheim, because now, including the goalies, everyone on this 25-man roster has now dressed and participated in a game, with the exception of Canada's third goalie, Darcy Kemper, who backed up Jordan Binnington. We'll talk in a second about should Canada now stick with Jordan Binnington after Logan Thompson was very sharp against the Swiss. Another interesting wrinkle to this conversation now. But when you look at this group and the ice time from Friday's game against Switzerland, important to me to see Cale Makar, who took a couple shots last game, play just south of 22 minutes. That's good and a very healthy number in a back-to-back scenario. Shea Theodore seems to be doing the job, elevated into that top 4, playing alongside Colton Parayko. And as mentioned, Travis Sanheim and up front, Seth Jarvis both get their feet wet. You never know when you need to turn to those players, perhaps later in the tournament, and you don't want to have someone come in game 5 and not be used to the level. But beyond that, no matter what, when everyone departs Milan and goes home, they're going to feel like they were part of this Team Canada success if it ultimately lands with them winning the gold. And that team aspect of it, I think, is important, which is why I think it would be smart for the U.S. to get their guys in that didn't play last game, including Jackson Lacombe and Clayton Keller. Get them in the mix. You've got back-to-back games this weekend. One of them should be a laugher. The other one will be a bit of a test. Why not use the embarrassment of riches and depth that you have? And we're probably going to see that in the goaltending department as well to spread that around.
And with Canada punching their ticket to the quarterfinal and just how dominant they've looked, I'll use the phrase managing minutes, but you can continue to mix in a Jarvis or a Sanheim if you want to, and sprinkle those minutes around without putting so much pressure on your top pairs and your top six and those elements. So it'll be interesting to see what the Canada lineup looks like for their third game. You mentioned Jordan Binnington and Logan Thompson, both goalies looking good. We had the goaltending conversation a few days ago, and what do you do if you're Canada, and what does your number one look like? For me, Logan Thompson was great, but I haven't seen anything that says Jordan Binnington should not be the guy moving forward for Canada.
Okay, so I think Canada will go with Binnington. It's clear that John Cooper likes to stick with what he knows, including with some of the roster selections this year. And I won't soon forget I'm not going to say creepiness, but the intent and the focus and intensity that came from Jordan Binnington riding in the golf cart in his full gear on the way to the ice surface here, locked in on the camera. And I think it speaks to the mental fortitude that he has. He has a superpower, and it's the confidence and belief in himself. That said, I'd still go with Logan Thompson. I thought he was great against Switzerland. I thought against a much more dangerous opponent, he made more critical saves. And I think his game in the end is in better shape. But I do think it's not about what I think. I think Canada is going to go with Jordan Binnington.
Yeah, well, John Cooper's comment after that first game when he was asked about Jordan Binnington, and he said, yeah, he's been my number one for like the last 350 days or whatever that line was. He clearly has the decision in his mind that Jordan Binnington is his number one. And you and I have talked plenty that it's not, the story doesn't change until it changes, or it's not a thing until it's a thing. We haven't seen enough, in my opinion, that this is a thing. You know, if it becomes a thing in game 3, if Jordan Binnington plays that game, or you're in the quarterfinal round and it becomes a thing during the first period or second period, then sure. But this isn't a thing yet for me until it is.
It was a shutout. I mean, how could it be a thing?
Yeah. He's got the clean sheet. He's maintaining the shutout streak for Canada from 12 years ago. Logan Thompson let one in.
Exactly.
Well, Canada, they looked impressive again. It was game 2 of their back-to-back. The U.S. off today. They have their back-to-back starting this weekend, and they looked as impressive in their opening game, but it was against Latvia, 5-1. Now, you've got this Denmark-Germany back-to-back thing in terms of the schedule, and you were talking about some possible goal differential coming into play. Germany, the way they've looked in their first game, and Draisaitl obviously looks like he's ready to go, scoring that early goal. Is Germany going to be a bit of a problem when you deal with them on the second game of a back-to-back? So the U.S., this is a big weekend. Obviously, it's preliminary play, but this is a big weekend for them in terms of setting themselves up for the knockout round.
It really is, and you would think U.S. Denmark just win Group C. Not really that big of a thing. Who's counting? But everyone will be, because I think in the end, the way Group B has played out, and if Jared, you could pop up the group standings, I'll explain why. The U.S. should be trying to fight for and battle for the easiest path possible, which would be the number 1 overall seed. So let me explain quickly how this works. After this preliminary round is done, all 12 teams are ranked in order from 1 through 12. The top 4 get a bye directly to the quarterfinals. The bottom 8 play each other, And then the winners of those games, the play-in games, advance to the quarterfinal. So goal differential is going to come in as a tiebreaker because potentially if Canada and the US, or maybe Canada, Slovakia, and the US all finish with 9 points, which is very much possible. What if, by virtue of Finland's win over Sweden today, what if the US doesn't get the number 1 seed based on goal differential? Canada has outscored its opponents 10-1. The US is at 5-1 with those 2 games pending. What you want to try to avoid is a scenario where Sweden is the number 3 seed coming out of Group B and gets one of those sort of bottom 8 to 12 spots in the overall ranking, and then comes in as the team that advances in the bracket to play the second or third place team if they win. So my point is, what you could be staring down if you do not get the number 1 overall seed could be Sweden, or Finland for that matter, in the quarterfinal, which is a very live dog and could put your entire Olympic tournament in jeopardy. So it's single elimination. We talked off the hop about how Canada and the US have, to me, separated themselves from the pack, but that doesn't mean that you can't lose to a stacked Sweden team in the quarterfinal and go home insanely disappointed. So yes, these games this weekend do really mean something.
We're going to get to what Slovakia has done in that Group B in a little bit, but obviously they have thrown a wrench into this whole thing, and it's been a lot of fun to see. But for the Americans and taking on these next 2 games, you know, we're seeing Canada's top 6 just absolutely dominate. And it's no surprise when you look at the caliber of player that is in their top 6. You go to that Latvia game that the U.S. won 5-1, and for me, you know, the story is Brock Nelson. The story is Jack Hughes. You know, the Tkachuk brothers looked really good, but it's the bottom 6 for the U.S. that was really driving that offensive bus. And if you're going to get into a game against Denmark and you basically have to run up the score, you know, because if you're going to play the goal differential game with Canada, that's a nasty game to play, especially that they're already up 10-1 on their opponents. You know, what do we need to see here? Do we need to see more out of the top 6 for the U.S. in order to run up that score? I just don't feel like we can rely on Brock Nelson and Jack Hughes and Tage Thompson and the U.S. power play to be the elements that get you on Canada's level in terms of goal differential. You're going to need a 3-point game from Austin Matthews or a 1-goal, 2-assist game from Matthew Tkachuk. That top 6 for the U.S. needs to start showing its teeth, I think, tomorrow against Denmark. Not that they did it against Latvia. They did. Right. They just need to show it more. A little more rabidness coming out of that group.
Yeah, and it's not nitpicky at all because, I mean, it's a nice problem to have that your bottom 6 is scoring like they did to start. But you're right. I mean, it's not even necessarily the Tkachuks because they were making something happen with Jack Eichel. It's that second line that you see on your screen. Mm-hmm. Austin Matthews, Matt Boldy, Jake Gensel. Matthews got rocked in the first period, and I was shocked watching in the building, seeing how in distress he was on the bench, clutching his head in his helmet, that a concussion spotter didn't pull him from the game and say, hey, you need to go be examined. I'm not posing that as an excuse for his lack of production. I mean, if we're being honest, this season and perhaps the last 18 months, he has been a very average player in the NHL, not the elite sharpshooter that we saw previously when he had a 69-goal season. So maybe with some recency bias, not all that shocked that he was rather unproductive to start and open the Olympics, but just 1 game. Too early to write that story yet, but you're right.
Yeah.
If there is something to watch for Team USA moving forward, it's can you find a way to get that line going? Because I'll say this, as good as Brock Nelson has been and as much of a believer as I am in Dylan Larkin, I thought actually Tage Thompson was not that good on Thursday before scoring that beautiful power play goal. That Team USA does not have a shot against Team Canada as well as they're firing on all cylinders without that Matthews line going.
Yeah, it's It's just one of the storylines entering the Denmark game, obviously, and I think we all wondered, okay, Canada's probably your 1 seed, the U.S. is probably your 2 seed, but you do have an opportunity to try and flip that ranking when you do get into the quarterfinal round. We've talked about Slovakia, we've talked about Group B quite a bit, but let's get into the meat of this one. They come out on the first day, they shock Finland, upset Slafkovsky, playing out of his mind. This kid loves playing in the Olympics. 4 points in his 2 games, as good as McDavid has been. But this game against Sweden, there's some serious juice to it because they're 1 point away from locking up Group B. But we also talked about how the scenarios could play out affecting the U.S. with Finland and Sweden, or if Sweden finds a way to beat Slovakia, now that throws Group B into its own little tiebreaker tizzy. So this is the now fascinating group to watch from the preliminary side of things as we go through the final games here of the opening round.
All right, so I am not smart enough to do all this math, but if you were to take Sweden and have them beat Slovakia by a 4-1 score on Saturday, it is peak chaos. It's everything that you'd want to think about in terms of tiebreakers and going to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th option to see who's winning the group. Very spicy. So keep an eye on that. But you're right. Slovakia, 1 point. They can make it super simple on everyone. 1 point clinches the group. And we ran through a ton of different scenarios thinking about how Group B might look or work. I don't think any of them at any point included Slovakia winning their group. So
yeah,
I don't know that I'd call them a medal favorite, but what they've done is they've played themselves into the medal contender conversation, which I think you can draw a circle around the number of teams that are in that conversation.
I was taking a look at this actually before we jumped on, so I'm going to try and do the math off the top of my head. If I blow it up in my own face, I fully understand that. But I believe right now you've got Slovakia +4 on the goal differential because of their win over Finland and beating Italy. And you've got even for both Finland and Sweden. So if Sweden wants to really throw this into a tizzy, they need to win by 4. And that essentially is going to flip around the goal differential situation and mix things up with Finland. If it's anything less than that, I think Slovakia does pick up the goal differential tiebreaker in some fashion. But like you said, we're getting to the 3rd and 4th tiebreaker. But I believe it's going to take a 4-goal win to essentially erase that goal differential for Slovakia.
Well, here's why I don't think that's going to happen.
Or no, 3. I guess 3 would do it. 3 would knock them down to 1. You're right.
I think Sweden has looked woefully unprepared. And I don't know if they're at odds with their coach. I don't know if they disagree with the deployment or the structure or style attack. Something is off with Sweden for such a talented group, even though Hedman doesn't look like really quite right. I'm very surprised to see them in this spot because a lot of people would have had them comfortably positioned in the 3 spot for the bronze. And Sam Hallam, their coach, something's off there. And I think it starts right with their coach. And honestly, in Finland, interestingly enough, I don't know if you saw the report today from my pal Sammy Hoffren, but he reported that Finland players, obviously the connections are strong. Finland players had asked if they could potentially bring in Paul Maurice as a coach for their Finland squad at some point in the lead up to the Olympics, just based on the work that he's done with the Florida Panthers, which the first thing I think of then is, okay, so if the Finns want Paul Maurice on their bench, back-to-back Stanley Cup champions, why exactly is he not on Team Canada's bench?
That's a great question. It's I wouldn't even know how to approach that. When was this coaching staff named again? Was it leading up to Four Nations? Like when did they put the coaching staffs in place?
Last season before Four Nations.
So it would have been one Stanley Cup for Paul Maurice then when they named the coaching staffs.
One is enough, I think.
Yeah, John Cooper's got a couple of them as well.
Yeah, but look at his assistants.
Yeah,
he's won a Stanley Cup as an assistant, but he hasn't won as a head coach.
Yeah, you'd love to be a fly on the wall in every single one of those meetings or conversations. The Sweden thing is where my mind was when you were talking us through this, because even seeing the 0 minutes for Ekman Larsson in that first game for Sweden. Like, I know Italy was giving you some fits, but you pulled away there at the end. I'm like, this guy didn't even get mop-up time. A shift towards the end there.
Disrespectful is what it is. And that, I think it speaks to the issue that Sweden has, which is, look at how Canada played it in this game. All 25 players have now dressed for a game. And 24 of the 25 have played meaningful minutes for the team. Then you contrast that to Sweden. Ekman Larsson's an accomplished NHL player. Philip Forsberg is one of the faces of the Nashville Predators. Like, these aren't schlubs. These aren't guys that you're picking up off the street. These are like icons in Swedish hockey. And you've got the gall to dress them and then not use them. Like, it speaks to arrogance and a whole other part of it. And the Swedes, I mean, rightfully so, not many of them had interest in talking much about it in the mix zone.
Yeah, something. It just feels like something's going on there. Who knows if it would come out or if it'll come out after the tournament. But it's just been a strange look towards Team Sweden. You're right, and they're obviously dealing with Slovakia in their next game. And our next topic is kind of who's in the medal hunt here. Canada, obviously. The U.S., obviously, but it does get interesting after that. I was high on Finland. They get shocked by Slovakia. Slovakia's played themselves into the medal conversation, at least after 3 days of the Olympic tournament. But the way things could still play out especially in that B group, there's a lot that's going to be fun to watch here.
Yeah, but I think we've seen through 3 days of men's hockey to know enough to know who actually is an authentic threat. And for that reason, I'm crossing out Sweden. Something stinks there. Something's going on.
I agree.
I don't think they're going to be a medal contender. So I've got Canada and Switzerland. I've got Slovakia, US, and Finland. I don't think Czechia looked great. I'm disappointed because they were one of my teams that I had as a live dog, a sleeper heading in, but I'm not seeing it right now. Could change, I guess, but I think that's what you're looking at is essentially 5 teams and 3 of them are coming away from Milan with medals. That's how I view it 3 days in.
I'm with you on Canada. I'm with you on Slovakia. I'm with you on the U.S. Finland, for me, is still in the conversation. It was a tough loss that they dealt with in Game 1. We'll see what they look like in Game 3. The Kevin Fiala injury, I think, changes a lot for Switzerland. And there is certainly a level of grit there and the way they played Canada today. But at some point, you're going to have to score goals against Canada or Finland or the U.S. or Slovakia, and losing Kevin Fiala from your top line to your top 6, that's a major blow. Now, no update from the Swiss head coach. And you don't think so?
No, because what I'll say is, and we can talk about the Fiala injury in a second, but you really only need to beat the other teams and theoretically get to a semifinal, and losing the semifinal gets you to a bronze medal game. So I'm trying to think about it through a different lens, which is, you just got to be the third best team. And I wouldn't, if I were to set the odds myself right now, I would have, based on what I've seen, Switzerland as the third best team in this tournament right now. They played so incredibly fast in that first period. That was a level that Canada did not see in their first game out against Czechia. I don't know how many teams could skate with Switzerland the way Switzerland skated with Canada.
Okay. For me, losing Fiala, I really think that changes a lot for Switzerland up front. I do agree with you. You only have to be the third best team to win the medal. You're gonna, if you're 4 out of 4, you're going to get into the bronze medal game. But For me, I've got Finland, and it's mainly pedigree. It's the number of NHL players they have for me on Finland. I do want to see more from Finland in their third and final game, but I just on pedigree, I've got them ahead of Switzerland right now, especially with the Fiala injury.
Yeah, Fiala MVP of the 2024 Worlds, and what an odd injury that was.
Yeah, what'd you see there live?
Tangled up with Tom Wilson, play that happens, I don't know, 50 times a game, and fell awkwardly. And the oddest part to me was seeing Kevin Fiala stretchered off on his stomach.
Same here.
I can't remember ever. I'm trying to think of any time I've ever seen a player stretchered off. I've never seen them face down, which it weirded me out. I think it probably weirded out some of the players. You saw Drew Doughty, his Kings teammate, very close by as he was getting loaded up onto the stretcher to be taken out of Santa Giulia Arena. And I think everyone's hoping for the best, but a lot of the players in the mix zone after the game were talking about how that did not look good and that they think that this is something that could be pretty significant for Kevin Fiala moving forward for his Kings season, not to say nothing of the Olympics.
I completely agree. That was the first thing I noticed. Obviously, you bring a stretch out and you're like, oh man, this is not good. But yes, when he went out stomach down, I have never seen that in any sport. It's always lay on the back, stabilize the neck, when they put him on the stretcher, the whole 9 yards. And it's almost like they told him, hey, stay in the exact position you're in. We're going to wheel you out. Like, we don't want you to shift any part of your body. It was almost like they wanted him to freeze into a statue before wheeling him off. It was wild.
And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because we don't have a diagnosis or a timeline or anything like that. But if this does derail his season, I mean, you're talking about potentially derailing the Los Angeles Kings season as well. Reminder that the Kings are closer to the lottery right now than they are to a playoff spot on points percentage basis.
They just spent,
I don't mean 32nd place. I just mean like moving up into being in the top 5 or something like that. The Kings, I mean, they're kind of teetering here on the edge of that playoff spot, and they already acquired Artemi Panarin, who's going to be joining them for practice in 4 days. It's anyway, interesting scenario for the Kings, and probably going to spur up one of those debates again of whether or not the NHL should be participating, given that they're sending their prime assets to play somewhere else for a few weeks.
You took the words right out of my mouth that the Kings have already spent some premium assets to bring in Artemi Panarin if there is a Kevin Fiala hole in their lineup when they do come back from the Olympics. Some other news and notes from the Olympics. Obviously, the protective wear is a required element in here, and we've started to see players, or we've seen players wearing the neck guards. I don't know. Do we call David Pasternak's neck guard an actual neck guard? It's a pretty impressive picture. That looks like a wet rag tied around his neck.
It looks like a lasagna strip here in Italy. I mean, what exactly is the point here of this contraption? Like, is that making anyone safe? I guess what I don't understand is if it's mandated, it's for good reason, right? So he's wearing the visor correctly. He's not doing the flip up visor.
That's what I was going to bring up. The visor adjustment guys do.
Right. This is a joke. I mean, you're flat out making a mockery of it, which I guess the third grader in me might have appreciated a long time ago, but now I'm like, well, I mean, can't you just wear the right thing and wear it the right way? It's really not that hard and not that restricting.
Well, in the first game for the U.S., they zoomed in. There was a close-up of Brady Tkachuk, and I thought his neck guard sat a little loose. Now, he had, the thick guard. He didn't have what looks like the ring of a T-shirt cut off and soaked in water for the last 2 hours. Like, it was the actual neck guard, but it did look like it was hanging slightly looser on his neck as opposed to the tight, basically covering up the Adam's apple. So I think there's a few players that I'll say playing fast and loose with how they're actually wearing the equipment. Whether that gets changed or buttoned up, we'll see. But the most egregious one is Pasternak and this image right here
Yeah.
with with how that thing's hanging.
I was just going to say the real interesting thing for me is of the 200 players that are here in Milan, how many will come back to the NHL and just keep the neck guard on because they had to wear it and realize
Not
that it didn't
Pasternak.
really impact them that much? Well, obviously, but my point would be, will Sidney Crosby or will someone else, a prominent player, take the step forward? These guys are grandfathered into the neck guard change that's coming in. They don't have to worry about it, but someone has to get through this and say, man, that wasn't so bad. I can actually protect myself and make my wife or my mom or whoever worry a little bit less. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, well, that'll be fascinating to see if there is somebody that comes back and sticks with it moving forward here. So the neck guards, they're required. A little bit of a comedic moment when you see it on David Pasternak, but obviously there's a safety element that's also at play here, especially with the speed that these games are being played at and the injury to Kevin Fiala. Other safety
let me just
issues.
say this.
Oh, yeah.
If you watched the clip of close calls that the NHL logs in their situation room, they keep a file. If you saw the 35 to 40 that occur every season, it's a miracle that we don't have more. And I'm telling you, you would react the same exact way that I am talking about this because they don't even realize the peril that they put themselves in.
The closest thing that I have to that was a couple of years ago, the first round playoff series with Vegas and with Winnipeg, and I think it was game one. There was a full-blown pile-on for a puck late in the game, and I can't remember who the player was for Winnipeg, but basically caught a skate under the visor, and you could see the whole cut down the side. It's like, my God, how does this not happen more with the way these scrums develop over pucks and in tight space? It is astonishing that we don't see this more.
Brutal.
Well, it's not the only safety component that we're talking about today. Apparently, if you're broadcasting between the benches, you're going to need some helmet wear or something because we now have flying beer cups going on with the Swiss-Canada game. Yeah, Mike Johnson, who was covering things on the Canadian TV side, working between the benches, apparently had flying shrapnel coming his way. And I guess we now learn Corona is the beer sponsor out in Milan for these Olympics.
Yeah, it's actually the only beer that you can get in the arena, which is interesting. They sell Corona and Corona Zero, or as they call it here, Zero, which is interesting. Did not have Corona on my bingo card coming to Milan, but definitely did not have irate Swiss fans after that Sam Bennett hit and non-call, launching perfectly good beers onto the ice in the middle of play. I'm telling you, the Canadian bench went nuts. Every player on the team stood up. Some of them were slamming their sticks, trying to get the ref's attention. Some of the beers actually landed, like the beer throwing, the liquid landed on the bench and on the players. So you had Darcy Kemper, like at the next stoppage of play, like I saw him come over and he's like wiping the top of the bench there, like trying to get the beer off. I mean, I didn't expect that at all. I knew how passionate Swiss hockey fans are, but they do the whole whistle and just like they do in soccer. And they were really angry about that missed call.
It, the thing I take away from that is it's not one fan base. It's not one country. It's not one sport. You get enough fans lubricated. Anybody can do it. Anybody can go over the line and throw something on the ice or throw a cup of beer on the ice. And it's unfortunate that it happened. And I would imagine there's going to be something addressed or protocol wise with that arena discussed, but before tomorrow's games, but it truly can happen anywhere with all it takes is one moron, one drunk moron. And then it all bets are off. I've always felt that way.
Players are skating up the ice, swatting the beer cups with their stick as they were trying to avoid them, and play just continued on like nothing ever happened. It was amazing.
That's the other thing. How do the officials miss it? There's got to be at least one official that thinks, there's an object on the ice.
They just bent down and picked him up and kept going. That was it.
Well, we'll see what happens, I guess, with Swiss in their last game or last couple of games, because they're going to have the play-in element there to get to the quarterfinals. But obviously, tough to see for Team Canada dealing with that and the beer being thrown. It brings us to our last word for tonight's show. And even though we had the unfortunate incident of Swiss fans throwing beer, I mean, going all the way back to day one and the Slovakia fans in that win over Finland, there have been some awesome atmospheres from the European fans.
There really have, and I wasn't sure what to make of this Olympics. Would it be, I've done a bunch of World Juniors. Would it be a mostly sterile environment here? Would it be loud? Would fans be into it? How would different countries travel? I mean, the Swiss fans prior to the beer, it was electric, the chants and sing-songy nature that they have to watching games. That was fun. You mentioned Slovakia, and part of the fun for me has been really getting the lay of the land in Milan. I went over to the Duomo today, that area today. There's fans walking around wearing every country's jersey. I walked past a cafe. By the way, it was 60 degrees Fahrenheit today, 16 Celsius, not a cloud in the sky. It was beautiful. There was a pack of Latvian fans wearing jerseys. They had 5 tables covered in beer bottles and were just ripping darts, chanting. I mean, to see how passionate and proud everyone is. And some of these are home team advantage kind of things. Switzerland is 100 and some miles from here. The border's closer, but where the population centers are, it's not far at all. It's a couple hour drive. And so
I believe Slovakia had home ice advantage.
They did.
Finland.
And
Slovakia had a crowd.
Some of these countries are incredibly small. We talked about it last night. Latvia is 1.8 million people. Like, there's more than that in the Philadelphia metropolitan area. Could you imagine entering a team like that into a tournament like this to take on Canada or the US? It's amazing what these countries do and the support that they have. But to see it again, I'm just blown away by the environment and how good it has been for these games.
Well, and I think that environment's going to ratchet up as we get into the playoff rounds with those countries that do survive. So it's been a lot of fun to see so far. This is going to conclude this week's coverage. Frank is going to be in Milan for next week as well. And the U.S., they have their big weekend back-to-back as they try to match what Canada has done in their first 2 games. John Buccigross will also be back next week with you, Frank. Before we kick out, though, let's take a look at the schedule for tomorrow and what's going on with not just Team USA, but, we talked about Sweden and Slovakia. That's a big game. And then, obviously, Germany, they're playing Latvia, but the U.S. is going to see them at the end of this weekend.
Yeah, and U.S.-Denmark, we talked about the goal differential and how that'll be important for the U.S. if they can get the win to try and run up the score as much as possible. Sweden-Slovakia kicks things off just after noon local time here in Milan, and then the U.S. plays on Sunday as well to finish off their back-to-back set, closing out group play against Leon Draisaitl in Germany. Canada closes out their group play formality with France as well. So lots on the line this weekend. And then if some people say, hey, the tournament starts for real, we'll just remind you that Connor McDavid already has 6 points and is more than halfway to the Olympic record. When you're watching, swimming is a great one because they've got that virtual line that moves and you see like the OR for Olympic record or WR for world record. It's kind of amazing to think that we're 2 games in and that virtual line is coming into sight for Connor McDavid.
By the end of the weekend, he's definitely going to have the Canadian record. And by the end of the quarterfinals, he's probably going to have the Olympic record with the pace he's on. But a lot to watch this weekend, and obviously some exciting games on tap, including the U.S. with both Denmark and Germany. Once again, John Buccigross, he is back next week with you, Frank. Enjoy the rest of the Olympics in Milan. Had a blast doing this with you this week, man. Always fun coming on. But enjoy the weekend and enjoy things next week. That'll do it for this edition of Frankly Hockey on Victory Plus.